Hello and welcome to the Suzanne Atwell Show. I'm Suzanne Atwell. In this show, the disturbing rise of hate, violence, and racism in America, in Florida, and right here in Sarasota-Manatee counties. We turn to local religious leaders and an internationally respected sociologist for answers. But first, some background. On April 4th, 1968, the most infamous hate crime in American history occurred: the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. Following a decade of Dr. King's pacifist leadership, his murder by an avowed white racist inflamed riots that lasted for days, consumed 100 cities, 40 deaths, 15,000 arrests, the largest expression of social unrest since the Civil War. That same year, 1968, the U.S. Congress criminalized hate crimes, passing the first federal laws specifically making it illegal to commit crimes on the basis of race, color, religion, or national origin. According to the most recent statistics from the Department of Justice, hate crimes based on race, ethnicity, and ancestry are the largest category at 58%, followed by religion and sexual orientation. Not all states have hate laws. Most were slow to enact them, including Florida, and many do not include gender preference or sexual orientation. This map from the U.S. Department of Justice shows states like Florida who have hate laws and require data collection, states who have laws but do not require data collection, and 5 states that don't have any hate crime laws at all. In 1989, the Florida legislature finally addressed the issue and added the requirement to law enforcement agencies to report hate crimes. This graph from the state's Attorney General's office shows hate crimes in Florida have increased over 97% from 2014 to 2017, the most recent reporting period available. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, a respected national civil rights organization, hate groups are on the rise nationwide, with Florida having the dubious distinction of having the 3rd most in the country, 75 groups statewide. Sadly, the number of mass shootings that are motivated by religious and racial hatred are also on the rise. The toxic confluence of white nationalism, easy access to assault weapons, and a lack of political leadership has created a public safety epidemic the likes of which have never been seen. 22 Hispanics gunned down at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas. 11 Jewish congregants killed during services at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. 51 followers of Islam shot at a mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand. 9 African Americans during a prayer service in Charleston. And the largest hate crime-related mass shooting in American history, the Pulse Massacre in Orlando, where 49 died. These crimes and the destructive impact of hate have changed our world. What are the solutions? Our search for answers takes us to the religious leaders and persons of faith in our community. We start with the CEO of the Jewish Federation of Sarasota-Manatee, Mr. Howard Tevlowitz.
I got into this business 30 years ago, where we were here to build community, provide social services, education. Now I have to become an expert in working with Homeland Security, the FBI, local law enforcement, understand the difference between hard security, soft security, understand how to deal with both physical, potentially physical attacks, cyber attacks. Our world is completely on its head, and my job more and more is to worry about this.
We like to think in our community, Sarasota and beyond, that we are in a fair and safe community here. Are people gathering together more of an interfaith action that needs to take place?
Yeah, I think after the shooting in Pittsburgh, we had a program at the fairgrounds 2 days later. 2,400 people came out. Faith leaders, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, were all there. They spoke. we're in a different world today. The level of discourse is so high and it's shrill, and people live in their echo chambers and they hear what they want to hear. And unfortunately, those of us in minorities are on the receiving end, whether we're Jewish, Black, Hispanic, gay, it doesn't matter. People are on the attack, they're on the attack, and they go for soft targets. This is something that we should have learned about from the Holocaust. You dehumanize, you belittle, and people don't become people anymore. And that's a lot of what we're looking at, especially dealing with left-wing, right-wing hate groups. They don't see the other as a person. They see the other as something they could step on like an ant.
Is there a responsibility for the pastor or the rabbi or whomever to talk to the congregants? How do they make the congregant who come to them for comfort and love and whatever, and still be realistic?
Okay, we live in the real world. And I know that almost every congregation, every synagogue in our two-county area, we represent all of Manatee County and Sarasota County, the rabbis are talking to their congregants. They're either talking to their congregants from the pulpit or they're talking to their congregants through email or mail. Everybody's aware of this. We want to make synagogues an inviting place to be. You have to do that understanding that our world changed after the Pittsburgh shooting.
When we look into these mass shootings, there is a link between the scale, it seems, of the massacres and the use of weapons, assault weapons. Obviously, gun control and public safety should go hand in hand, and they're major issues. Should religious leaders take a stance on this? How do you feel about that?
I think it's up to each individual rabbi how he or she feels about gun control. It also ties into the leadership of the congregation, what they want. Look, there's no right way or wrong way. It's the way they feel comfortable. We don't get involved with talking about gun control and legislation. That's not our purview. But each individual congregation has to face what they have to face. Also understanding that in Poway, the rabbi of an Orthodox synagogue had a phone with him. So there are things we have to do differently today than we've done before. And there may be armed people in congregations. I don't know that for sure, but you know, it's a different world.
There's another link in the growth, and I think you mentioned that a bit before, a link with the alt-right and separatist tone of the political discourse. How do you deal with that?
It's hard. Not only deal with the right, we deal with the left. The only thing the right and left agree on the bottom of their circle is they hate Jews. From where we come from in the Jewish community, we've lived through this. We lived through it, understanding what happened leading up to World War II, the language people used post-World War II, what happened when Jews came back to Poland and other areas. We're seeing it all over Europe today. The level of anti-Semitism is at that level of pre-World War II.
So do you think we're doing a good job here in our community on an interfaith level, since everything seems to be represented in some of these hate crimes?
Yeah, look, here's the good news. Sarasota is a unique community. We work together, we talk together, we get along. So at a higher level, we work together. That level of nasty discourse is not there. Now, there's hate groups that don't like any of us, but I think at a faith level, we just operate at a different plane. We're really lucky to live here.
I think Howard is right. We are lucky to live here for many reasons, including our diverse community of faith. But when a society is plagued by mass shootings, racism, and hate, what ethical responsibilities do religious leaders have to speak out when faith and politics collide? We went to a senior pastor of a prominent African American church for answers.
I believe it's my responsibility to try to use the influence I have to help not only the people that I serve here as pastor, but to help the community the best that I can. And so I'm always trying to leverage whatever influence I have to help us be a better community. And I think that's the responsibility of every faith leader, because we have a following, whether big or small. Right. And I think we've got to leverage that to try to help not only people we serve directly, but to help the community. And so our church is trying to be a community serving church. We want to get our hands dirty, so we're always trying to partner with different groups.
How do they all work together? Has this changed a lot in the past couple of years that you have more interfaith counsel? And is racism and hate, the hate groups, a subject at your meetings?
We definitely could do better with working together. I think that's a challenge. I see some level of cooperation, but sometimes I think we let our differences of belief sometimes prevent us from working on the things that we commonly agree on. I mean, I'm hopeful, but I think we could do better at working together to address some of the common problems we have as a community, especially hate.
And how have you changed the security situation at your church?
After the shootings at Emmanuel in South Carolina, that was a wake-up call for us, and I'm sure a whole lot of churches. And so we've had to form a security team here at Light of the World. We had to add a lot of cameras around our building because we have a lot of entrances. So we got cameras inside and outside. And we're fortunate here that we have a number of retired and current law enforcement officers who have formed a really great security team, because that's the context in which we're ministering now. And we've had a couple of odd instances. We've had someone interrupt our service and want to take the mic. And we've had some other mentally ill individuals come in, and fortunately for us, they weren't violent. But if they had been, you know, who knows what could have happened. And so we've had to form a team, and they're armed. And I never would have thought that I would have had to deal with that in the church. But as we see with these mass shootings in our country, no place is sacred anymore, or no place is off limits: schools, synagogues, and even churches. Back
to the conversations that you have with other people and with other members of other churches, how do you deal with this, and do you talk interfaith about security?
I tried to lead a conversation with our white counterparts in this community on race and racism. Matter of fact, right here in this sanctuary, we got together one day to have a conversation on race, and just to start it, and it was kind of hard, quite frankly. Right. It was uncomfortable for some, black and white, to have that conversation. But I was burdened, and I'd been fussing about it, you know, for over a year. We need to have this conversation. We need to have this conversation, because I felt like if faith leaders can get on the same page with race, then we can help the community change. And so it was very hard to do, because it's uncomfortable. But I think we've got to have these uncomfortable conversations if we're going to be a catalyst for change in our community. I purposely, intentionally have white pastors come and preach in this pulpit. And I propose, you know, to my peers, let's share pulpits. Let's do that. And it hadn't fully caught on, but it started. You know, I've preached at First Baptist downtown for Pastor Bill Hill. Matter of fact, after Hurricane Irma, we did a joint service one Sunday morning. Our choir sang at First Baptist. I preached, and Bill Hill has preached for us. And he's not the only one. There have been others. And so that's how I've tried to play my part in being intentional about racial reconciliation and you know, showing our people that you can't be a Christian and be racist. It's impossible. It's just inconsistent with the scriptures. And it takes courage from black and white pastors, because some of my white pastor friends have to confront some of the racism in their churches.
When we look at the mass shootings, the link between the sales of military assault weapons, gun control, public safety. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Personally, don't understand why anybody needs an AK-47 outside of the military. It's my personal opinion. But however, you know, we've had these guns for a long time, but we didn't see mass shootings like this in the 70s, 80s per se, not with this frequency. And so in my mind, there's something deeper than passing a law that's going to change the hearts. I'm not saying law should be passed, and that's not what I'm saying. Leaders have to be responsible in our rhetoric and what we say. Of course, you can't blame every political leader for every shooting. I get that. But there's no doubt in my mind that we can add fuel to people's already hate. Leader has to be responsible with their words and what they say. And And I think that the church, we've got to take our place in the world. We've got to show the love of Christ, and we got to be careful what we say, because I see some Christians who are sounding more political than biblical.
Powerful words from a pastor, and tough times for a country where politics and Bible-based values are so far apart. But Christians and Jews are not the only persons of faith being targeted by hate crimes, white supremacists, and mass shootings.
Our emphasis has moved from a place of welcoming and happiness and joy and brotherhood. That is still there, but obviously we have to be more aware of our surroundings, be more conscious of people who are coming to our place, trying to identify people who we don't know and seeing if they do belong here or don't belong here. So we are more concerned about these issues. We don't want it to happen to our community, and obviously everybody's scared.
Well, it's interesting. We all like to think that Sarasota is an enlightened, fair-minded community, which I think is basically true. But obviously, the community is not entirely free of racism.
People think that racism is going to divide us, but actually it brings people together. It brings up the good in people. And you know, 99% of the people that we have come in contact with are good people. People who want the good for everybody.
Sure.
It's the 1%, or I wouldn't even say 1%, less than that, that try and put division between us and try and create hatred and racism. As religious organizations and people of faith, we have to speak out when we see injustices, when we see racism. That's our duty, it's an obligation. But not only religious communities, I think politicians, I think the general public, people of conscience have to speak out when they see anything that's, you know, that's outside the norm. And we don't want, you know, racism and bigotry to become the norm.
Do you think that, you know, when we look at these mass shootings, do you think that, again, religious leaders have an obligation or to take a public stance on something like the relationship between these massacres and assault weapons?
I think, you know, that's a tricky question. I think assault weapons obviously don't belong in a civil society. I think the Second Amendment allows people to have assault weapons.
Right.
But I think, you know, we need to question and ask ourselves, what is the reason for having an assault weapon? Right. You know, if they're using it for hunting or using it for security, we need to get to the bottom of this, and we need to ask ourselves tough questions. I think beyond that, we need to think outside the box. I think we've come to a stage where people are polarized. You're either against guns or for guns, and there's no middle road. I think we need to maybe look at different scenarios where we can try and resolve these issues. You know, I'm not opposed to people having guns, but I think assault weapons is something that we need to look at, especially when it comes to people with mental illness,
Sure.
people who have a history of violence, you know, people who have issues with alcoholism and drug abuse. These are all, you know, very complicated issues.
Do you think there's a link between the growth of the alt-right and the white supremacist?
Personally, I do see a link. I mean, obviously it has grown significantly, not only in our country, but also in Europe. And I suppose now they have free reign to do whatever they want. It seems like it has grown significantly, you know, not only with the immigration crisis we're having, the assault weapons, you know, the polarization of our country where different religious groups are marginalized, people of color are marginalized. So we have become we have become sort of in different compartments,
Sure.
so to speak. So each person is looking out for themselves, and person of another faith or another color or different ethnicity is looked upon as not welcome here anymore. So we live in that environment where it's unfortunately given the alt-right a sense that they can do whatever they want, you know, without any consequences. And I think, as you said earlier, that it's a responsibility of all of us to speak out against it, and, you know, call them to account for that.
Right.
I mean, it's not right for people to have it's okay for people to have an opinion, you know, but to God and commit murder and crime and kill people simply because they don't agree with them, I think this is not what our country stands for.
We have heard from religious leaders. We now turn to an academic, specifically a noted sociologist and associate professor at New College, who also brings an Hispanic perspective to the conversation.
There's some data out there that shows, thinking specifically, for instance, with the Latino community, in that particular community, there's a very interesting split nationally. About close to 40% of the population share having experienced discrimination, and yet just almost as many, close to 40%, say that somebody has been positive, supportive towards them. So to me, that reflects that our society has that split of people who carry with them very strong, racist, discriminatory belief systems and take that into behaviors. And yet we also have populations who are very conscientious and are welcoming, supportive of all peoples in their society. And I think what we need to do is encourage more of that supportive, caring environment. I should point out that the experience of Latinos is different from the experience of the Black population, who have a bigger proportion of them who have experienced discrimination compared to Latinos. One of the points that I think we have to remember in relation to the issue of how does religion, what role does religion play in helping our society shape the kind of society we want to be. And in relation to the issue of race relations, ethnic relations, we have to remember that some people have used religion and religious scriptures of various religions in ways that would justify discriminatory action and hateful belief systems. Other groups within these religious communities have highlighted how scripture speaks to love and caring and wanting to be supportive towards each other. And I think in our community, if we want to enhance that kind of supportive, caring space, we need to have our religious leaders highlighting the way in which their own religious beliefs are really emphasizing that kind of love and care for other people.
And do you think we're doing that well?
I think it's a mixed bag, but for the most part, what I have observed here is a positive framework. I think various religious leaders are making that effort. One example, I actually want to, I know the emphasis is looking at religious leaders, but I think we also have to recognize that each and every one of us, we have a role to play within our own faiths. And one example is I've participated in, I guess we could call it a vigil that happens every Friday in support of Muslims in their mosque here in Sarasota. Many of the people that I've met there themselves are Jewish, right, in addition to some of us who are Christian. So I think that is a reflection of how each of us bring our faith in support for the rights of others to pursue their own religious beliefs. Absolutely. And we as a community need to do more of that.
Well, when we look at these mass shootings, there's a link. Is there a link between the scale of the mass shootings and the use of military assault weapons?
Yeah. When we are thinking, for instance, in this debate about gun control, and right now the discussion has been on the issue of preventing access to people with mental illnesses. And I think that we can, in every society there will be people with a wide variety of belief systems. It's not just about mental illness. It is about particular belief systems too. And when we make it possible for people who are at one point or another going to take action upon hateful belief systems, we facilitate the damage in greater damage when we are allowing people to have war-grade weaponry,
Absolutely.
military-grade weaponry. It's problematic.
And we always ask, isn't there an ethical and moral issue to deal with this?
It is, indeed. I mean, that is the issue. I think, indeed, faiths, the role of religion in any society is to provide the basis of the ethical guidance of the behaviors of the people in those societies. So from that perspective, religion plays a very important role in guiding people with regards to how they relate to each other and how they behave in their own overall society. So from that perspective, certainly I believe that all our religious leaders have an ethical obligation to contribute to creating a peaceful, caring, and I would say tolerant, at the very least tolerant society.
How would you sum that up? Because I think that's what I want to leave this with is what are we dealing with on a large scale here? If
what you're talking about is what are we dealing with in terms of the racially based hatred, I do not think it's an either-or solution or problem. It is a very complex situation, and we have to acknowledge that when it comes to structures of oppression, like racism being one of them, it is not just an individual belief system. It involves institutional structures and then broader social systems that perpetuate particular behaviors and belief systems in how we act. One example being, it's not just about, for instance, in the context of a school situation, the belief system of the teacher. It's about how we structure the ways in which we relate and we address internal conflict in a school system, right? So we know that there is a tendency for teachers to punish more harshly the black students compared to white students, if we think in black and white. So from that perspective, we're beginning to perpetuate certain structures, and we cannot just blame it on the teacher. It is how are we as a society training the teachers to address conflict and to address particular behaviors from students where we're trying to guide them, in our society. How does then the principal of that school get trained to address those issues? How does the school board think through those issues and train? And then how do we as Sarasota, as a city, address the depth of the issues of race relations? And so it is not a simple issue of the justice system. It's not a simple issue of an individual perspective. It's all of that together in the ways in which they feed on each other.
There you have it. A lot to think about and a lot of work to do. If you would like to learn more about race relations in Florida, here are some links. Go to the State Attorney General's office at myfloridalegal.com/civil rights. And for state-by-state statistics on mass shootings, visit statista.com/mass shootings in the U.S. by state. And to track hate groups in Florida, and right here in Sarasota and Manatee counties, go to splcenter.org/hate-map. And you can always watch this episode and all our past shows on my website, SuzanneAtwell.org, or visit us on Facebook and YouTube. That wraps up this show. We hope you've learned something and enjoyed watching. Until next time, I'm Suzanne Atwell, and I'll see you around town.